My name is Judy Herndon, and I turned 21 last summer. It should have been the kind of milestone birthday you remember fondly laughs, drinks a sense of freedom, the feeling that your life is finally opening up in front of you. Instead, it became the kind of memory that leaves a hollow, aching spot in your chest whenever it resurfaces. And it all began with what I believed was just a family dinner. Before I describe the moment everything shifted, I need to explain the people who shaped the world I grew up in. My parents, Sharon and Rick, are what you might call traditional, but not in the warm, comforting sense. There, the appearances are everything kind of traditional, always polishing the family image, always comparing, always asking me why I couldn't be more like my older brother. And then there's him, Jason. 27 years old, corporate PR professional with his own condo downtown, a wardrobe full of tailored suits, and a long history of being the Herndon family's pride and joy. He was the golden child from the beginning. Straight A's debate team. Captain, early internships, glowing recommendations. He wore praise like a custom-made jacket perfectly fitted to his ego. As a kid, I followed him around trying to earn a scrap of approval. I wanted him to see me as his little sister, someone worth noticing. But Jason always treated me like background noise, something he had to step around, rather than someone he cared to acknowledge. Eventually, I stopped chasing after him and threw myself into something I loved, design coding, building anything digital from the ground up. In high school, I freelanced small projects, even built an e-commerce website for a local shop. I never flaunted my work. I just wanted to be seen for who I was. But in our house, being noticed required a title, a trophy, or a plaque on the wall. Anything less didn't count. So when my 21st birthday approached, I didn't expect more than a grocery store cake and a forced family photo. But then my mother called and told me they were taking me out to dinner, just the family, at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Jason's favorite place, not mine. Still, the invitation felt almost hopeful, like maybe they were finally trying. I even ironed my jeans, which I never do, and arrived 5 minutes early. But they were already seated. Jason sat confidently at the head of the table, perfectly groomed, as always, looking like he'd walked straight out of a magazine ad. My mother gave me the kind of cheek kiss she only uses in public. My father barely looked at me before returning to his wine. We ordered, and within minutes, the conversation belonged entirely to Jason. His latest account, how late he'd been staying at the office, how his boss trusted him with high-level responsibilities. I tried to join the conversation mentioning a new web redesign I'd completed for a client, but it was like whispering into a storm. My words disappeared. Then the food arrived, and with it came the moment that still makes my stomach tighten. Jason stood holding his glass like he was accepting an award. My mother clapped her hands lightly, already smiling. I braced myself, hoping he might finally acknowledge that the dinner was for me. Instead, Jason lifted his glass higher and said, "To promotions, to hard work paying off, and to some of us actually doing something with our lives." The table erupted in laughter. My mother laughed the loudest, throwing her head back. My father smiled proudly, like Jason had said something charming. I sat there frozen, smiling because I didn't know what else to do, waiting for anyone to say that wasn't appropriate. No one did, not even for a second. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I realized I wasn't just forgotten, I was convenient wallpaper. This dinner wasn't for my 21st birthday, it was just another stage for Jason. The rest of the evening blurred. No one mentioned my birthday again. No cake, not even a candle. No toast, not even a sarcastic, "You're finally legal." Just more conversation about Jason's job, his condo, his brilliance. I became invisible, a placeholder occupying a chair. When the bill arrived, my father reached casually for his wallet, but my mother stopped him and laughed. "Let Judy cover it. She's doing that computer stuff, right?" The way she said computer stuff made it sound like I was babysitting laptops for spare change. So I paid. Quietly. Without protest. I handed over my card, signed the bill, and stood up. "I have an early client call tomorrow," I lied. I just couldn't sit at that table another minute. Jason made some smug comment I didn't bother registering, and my mother gave me a distracted happy birthday sweetie without even lifting her eyes from her espresso. I walked to my car in a daze. When I sat down in the driver's seat, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the steering wheel. I just stared through the windshield at the shimmering streetlights and felt myself hollow out. I kept thinking one thought over and over so quietly it almost didn't feel like my own voice. They don't see me. They never did. That night, in my parked car outside a restaurant that had never meant anything to me, I realized something important. I was done waiting for them to change. Done hoping they'd finally look at me and see a daughter worth celebrating. Done shrinking just so Jason could shine brighter. I drove home with my birthday untouched, unacknowledged, erased before it even happened. But as I walked into my apartment that night, something shifted. It wasn't anger yet, it was clarity, a calm, cold understanding that I couldn't unsee. And if you think this was the worst part, trust me, it wasn't. This was only the beginning. Because exactly 1 year later, everything flipped. Jason's spotless image shattered, my parents' perfect facade crumbled. And the truth came out piece by piece. I didn't yell, I didn't fight, I didn't sabotage anything. I just watched. And for the first time in my life, they were finally forced to see me. After that birthday dinner, I didn't cut my family off dramatically. I didn't storm out of their lives or write some angry message. Instead, I did something that confused them far more. I got quiet. Not in a passive-aggressive way, just quiet enough that they had to live without the version of me who always showed up to be ignored. I stopped attending the brunches where Jason dominated every topic like a politician at a podium. I stopped replying to the long group texts about his job, his condo upgrade, or his latest gym routine. I responded politely, briefly, like someone answering a survey, not someone desperate to belong. And strangely, the silence gave me space to breathe. Without the constant pressure of comparison or the background noise of their disappointment, I finally had room to grow. I threw myself into my work, web development, UI, UX design, SEO, optimization, interface, overhauls, anything people would pay for. The more distance I created from my family, the clearer my thoughts became. I wasn't a shadow anymore, not when I was alone. I wasn't Jason's sister. I was just Judy. And Judy had potential. Clients started referring me to other clients. Small projects turned into bigger ones. I invested in a proper desk setup, dual monitors, a drawing tablet, lighting for client calls, and a handful of online courses that taught me more than my parents ever cared to understand. Within 6 months, I wasn't scraping by. I was thriving. A few monthly retainers here, a corporate gig there. Good money. Real stability. Independence. But I didn't tell my family any of that. Not out of spite. Well, maybe a little, but mostly out of self-protection. I wanted to nurture something of my own without their commentary, their dismissal, their comparisons to Jason. The quiet I created became a sanctuary. Still, they didn't disappear. My mother sent occasional texts, always framed around Jason's accomplishments. Jason is presenting at a conference in Chicago. Isn't that amazing? Jason bought a reclaimed barnwood coffee table. Such great taste, Jason's boss invited him to a leadership event. So proud. Every message was a reminder of my place in the family hierarchy, relevant only when compared to Jason and always losing. Then something unexpected happened. My dad called me one evening. Not a text, not a forwarded article about Jason, an actual phone call. It had been months since we'd spoken beyond the occasional holiday formality. When I answered, he sounded different, less stiff, almost curious. So, what exactly do you do again? He asked. I blinked at my screen, startled. I explained a recent project, a full site redesign for a logistics company that had seen a measurable increase in user engagement afterward. My dad whistled softly. That sounds pretty big. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone casual. It's going well. There was a silence, then a simple, good for you, Judy. Just 6 words. But they landed heavier than any insult from that birthday dinner. For a moment, I wondered if something had actually shifted between us, if maybe they were finally starting to see me. It lasted exactly 3 weeks. Because a few days later, my mother sent a group message announcing she'd rented a lakeside cabin for a family weekend. Just like the old days, she wrote, we'd love to have you there. The old days. The ones where Jason got praised for breathing and I got lectured for existing. I almost didn't go. I stared at the message for a long time, debating. But a part of me, some naive, hopeful part, wanted to test the waters, see if anything really had changed. So I said yes. When I arrived, Jason was already the center of attention, telling some dramatic story about how he single-handedly saved a client campaign on the brink of collapse. My mother watched him like he was the star of a show she'd seen 100 times but still clapped for. My father nodded along, impressed by everything Jason said, even when it was exaggerated beyond belief. I walked in carrying a bottle of wine. My mother acted like I'd just returned from war. Judy. You made it, she said, hugging me tightly. Jason gave me a once-over and smirked. Wow, you look different. It's called hydrating and getting sleep, I said. You should try it. He smirked, and my mom laughed awkwardly. My father suddenly remembered something urgent on his phone. The entire weekend felt like déjà vu. No matter what I did, cooking, cleaning, contributing to conversations, Jason took over. When I offered to cook dinner one night, he cut me off. Actually, I already planned the meals, he said, pulling out a color-coded list, like we were prepping for a survival trip, not a simple family dinner. He even crossed out items on the grocery list I had brought, doing it slowly, dramatically, as though evaluating a child's homework. I kept my composure. It was just 3 days. I could survive 3 days. But then came the last night. We sat around a fire pit by the lake. The sky was dark and open, the water still and quiet. We wrapped ourselves in blankets as my mom reminisced about how fast Jason and I had grown and how both of you turned out so successful in your own ways. I almost laughed at that one. Jason swirled his third glass of wine and looked at me with this patronizing calm. You know, Judy, I've always been a little worried about you. My stomach tightened. Oh, yeah, he said. You were just kind of lost. You never had direction, but I'm glad you finally figured out something to do. Even if it's just tech gigs, at least you found something that makes you feel useful. My mom nodded like Jason was delivering a sermon. My father stared at the fire. I stood slowly, my hands steady. Actually, I said I just negotiated a 6-month full-stack development contract. $90,000. Jason blinked. My mother laughed as though I'd told a joke. That's adorable, sweetie. It's real, I said calmly. Jason scoffed. Come on, what startup pays you that much? Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe I'd just had enough. I pulled out my phone, opened the signed contract, and handed it to my father. He read it, then read it again. His eyebrows lifted. This is real, he said quietly. He handed it to my mother. Her smile died. Jason stared into the fire like he wanted the flames to swallow the evidence whole. I guess he muttered, finally tech scams are getting convincing. That was it. The snapping point, not loud, not violent, but a clean, final tear inside me. I looked at the 3 people who shared my DNA and realized none of them were capable of seeing me, not truly. And I was done performing for an audience that never cared. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, I don't need you to believe me. The world outside this cabin already does. Then I packed my things and left before anyone could stop me. 3 days later, Jason emailed me. The subject line said, "We need to talk." The message was just one sentence. How did you get that contract? I've been trying to pitch that same startup for months. And that was the moment I knew he wasn't just irritated, he was afraid. Jason's email sat in my inbox for almost a full day before I opened it again. That single line, how did you get that contract? I've been trying to pitch that same startup for months, told me more than any apology ever could. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even sibling rivalry. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone has built their entire identity on being better than you and suddenly the ground beneath them starts shifting. I didn't reply, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what he wanted: reassurance, validation, a guarantee that he was still the star and I was still the footnote. I refused to give him that. Weeks passed. Silence settled between all of us, thick and revealing. My mother didn't text. My father didn't call. Jason didn't send a follow-up. For the first time in my life, I had peace. Uneasy at first, then strangely freeing. I worked, I slept, I built. And without their constant noise in my ear, I started to understand who I was when I wasn't living in Jason's shadow. Then one night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Something in my gut told me to pick up. Judy, a shaky voice whispered. It's Jason. I sat up straight. Jason had never sounded small, never hesitant, never anything less than polished confidence. Is everything okay? I asked, already knowing the answer. He sniffed hard. I got let go. My breath hitched. From your job? They called it restructuring, he said bitterly. But that's bullshit. They were cleaning house and somehow forgot to tell me I was standing in the dirt pile. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This was Jason, the golden child, the one who never slipped, never stumbled, never broke. I'm sorry, I said softly, and I meant it. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I've never been unemployed. My resume doesn't even know what that word means, and I can't tell Mom and Dad they'll fall apart. There was a beat of silence, and then he said something I wasn't prepared for. You were right, about everything. I sat there stunned. They pit us against each other, he continued. They made everything a competition. And I let them. I let it twist the way I saw you. It was the closest thing to an apology Jason had ever given me, and it landed with a strange mix of relief and bitterness. We talked for over an hour. He told me about the weeks leading up to his firing projects, reassigned without warning coworkers turning cold meetings happening without him. He admitted he'd been drowning for months and didn't know how to tell anyone. I told him I didn't hate him, even when I had every reason to. I told him I used to admire him, that all I ever wanted was to be seen not judged or dismissed. When we finally hung up, something between us had shifted. Maybe not healed, but softened. Over the next few weeks, he called a few more times. Not long emotional calls, just check-ins. He even asked for advice on freelancing. Said he was tired of the corporate games. I shared what I could. After all these years, for the first time, it felt like we weren't competing. We were simply two adults navigating life. Then came the night everything changed. We were on another late-night call. One of those conversations where he was half venting, half reflecting. Jason was talking about how cutthroat his old workplace had been. No one shared leads, he said. Everyone protected their opportunities like they were gold coins. Kind of reminds me of that summer Mom freaked out because she thought you'd missed your college deadline. I frowned. What deadline? The early decision one, he said casually, for Columbia. Every muscle in my body froze. Jason, what about Columbia? He paused. Too long. Too still. Wait, forget I said that. No, I said sharply. Tell me what you meant. Judy, it's not a big deal. Jason, what did you mean? My voice left no room for retreat. I could hear his breathing shift, the sound of someone who knew they'd stepped on a landmine. Dad withdrew your application, he finally said quietly. Mom made him. They said New York wasn't a good fit for you. For a moment, my heart stopped beating. He what? I don't know the details, he rushed. I only overheard them talking about it. You were stressed that year, and Mom said you were unsure, and they didn't want you to feel pressured. I wasn't unsure, I snapped. I was scared, but I was ready. Jason went silent. Completely silent. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling as every memory from senior year resurfaced: the essays, the transcripts, the recommendation letters, the confirmation email saying my application was complete. And then, nothing. No rejection, no wait list, just silence. I had thought the portal glitched. I had thought I failed. But I didn't fail. They sabotaged me. Because if I left, if I went to Columbia, if I grew, if I succeeded, they couldn't control me. I wouldn't be the quiet backdrop to Jason's spotlight anymore. I would have stepped into a life that was mine, not the one they kept me boxed into. And they couldn't allow that. The realization hit so hard it took the breath out of me. This wasn't favoritism. This wasn't neglect. This was calculated. And for the first time in my life, I understood the truth about my parents, not the decorated version they showed the world, but the real one. They didn't want me to fail. They needed me to fail. The next morning, with shaking hands, I emailed Columbia University. I asked politely, professionally, if there were any archived records from the year I applied. I claimed I was doing a personal project on college admissions. A week later, they replied. There was a file, there was an application, and there was an acceptance. I had been accepted. They had mailed the offer to my parents' address, and the letter never reached me. When I read the email, my hands trembled so violently I had to sit down. I stared at the words again and again, each time feeling a fresh wave of anger, grief, disbelief. I didn't lose my future. It was stolen. And that was the moment something sharp and clear crystallized inside me. This wasn't about revenge out of anger. This was about reclaiming what was mine. And I was done playing small for a family who had clipped my wings on purpose. The morning after I received Columbia's email, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the message like it was written in another language. I must have read it 20 times. Each sentence felt like a blade, gently pressing deeper, revealing a truth I never asked for, but desperately needed. I hadn't missed anything. I hadn't been rejected. I hadn't failed. My parents hid my acceptance letter. My life forked at that moment. One path was the emotional one, screaming, accusing, demanding answers, confronting them like the wounded daughter I'd been my entire life. The other path was quiet, intentional, strategic. The latter was the one they never saw coming. I chose the second path. Instead of calling anyone, I opened a blank document and titled it Proof. I pasted the email from Columbia, downloaded the PDF copies they attached, and printed everything. I slid the papers into a folder, placed it in my desk drawer, and closed it gently. It wasn't about revenge yet, it was about truth. If my parents had rewritten my future once I wasn't giving them another chance. The days after the revelation were strange. I felt steady in ways I hadn't expected. The shock hurt, yes, but the clarity it brought was grounding. I finally understood why so many things in my life had felt restricted. Why every choice I tried making was too much not practical or unnecessary. Why every time I dreamed beyond the city limits, they pulled me back with guilt or condescension. I had never been protected. I had been controlled. And the worst part, it had worked. But not anymore. I updated my website, polished my case studies, reorganized my client testimonials, and posted a few clean, confident updates on LinkedIn. Nothing flashy, nothing smug, just undeniable proof of a career that stood on its own. A few posts about user-centered design, one about increasing conversions for a client, another about a workshop I was offering. I didn't tag my family, didn't send it to them, didn't announce it in the group chat. I simply stepped into the light they had tried so hard to keep me away from. And people noticed. Not my parents, not yet, but everyone else did. A local business newsletter shared one of my posts. A recruiter reached out to ask if I'd ever considered speaking about UX. Then a tech conference in my area sent me an invitation, 2 full sessions, and a closing talk. I stared at the email, stunned and thrilled. The room they tried keeping me out of was opening on its own, slowly but surely. The first person I told wasn't my mother or father. It was Jason. We weren't close, not really. Not after years of rivalry, he didn't even know he was playing alone. But the calls we'd been sharing recently had built something tentative, something fragile and unexpectedly real. When I told him about the conference invitation, he hesitated. "Wait," he said, "which conference?" I told him the name. Silence. "You're doing the closing session?" "Yes." Another pause. Then in a quieter voice, "I'm on a panel that same weekend." His tone was complicated, pride blended with fear, insecurity blended with curiosity. "You'll do great," he finally said, and for once there was no smug undercurrent. The week before the conference, I called him. "I saw your name on the speaker list," I said. "Congrats." He exhaled through the phone. "I didn't expect you to be there too." "I didn't expect it either. But here we are." "Yeah," he said softly. "Here we are." I could feel the shift, a subtle acknowledgement that the ground between us had changed. Jason wasn't standing on his pedestal anymore. He was finally standing next to me. But even then, the truth wasn't done unraveling. A few days later, I had tea with my grandmother, my dad's mother. She'd always treated me differently than the rest of the family did. When I was younger, she was the only adult who asked me what I liked, what I dreamed about, who I wanted to be. She listened. I hadn't seen her in months. When I told her what Columbia had confirmed, she closed her eyes and nodded, like she wasn't surprised. Then she stood up, slowly opened a drawer in her living room cabinet, and pulled out a faded cardboard box. "This," she said, "is yours." Inside were saved documents, old report cards, a few printed essays, copies of recommendation letters, a sealed envelope from Columbia addressed to me, never opened. My throat tightened as I held it. "I always wondered why your mother left this here," Grandma whispered. "She brought it by the house that same month, said it was clutter. But clutter doesn't look like this." She had protected what she didn't understand. My first acceptance letter, my grades, my potential. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew something wasn't right. And she kept everything. My chest ached with a mix of grief and gratitude. Then, as if fate had a sense of humor, Jason sent me a message later that night. "I have something you should see," he wrote. "Don't freak out." He emailed me a screenshot of an old email thread between our mother and a friend who worked in the admissions office. My mother had written, "Help redirect Judy's file. She's wasting time on a path that isn't realistic for her temperament." My temperament. The phrase made my skin crawl. This wasn't fear. This wasn't concern. This was manipulation, surgical, deliberate, expertly disguised as parental guidance. Jason admitted he'd found the thread tucked in an old folder when he was cleaning out his work email. "I used to think they protected me," he said quietly on the phone. "Now I think they needed someone to shine, so they could excuse everything they did to you." It was the first time Jason saw the truth as clearly as I did. "What are you going to do?" he asked. The question lingered between us. I didn't answer immediately because the truth was complicated. I wasn't looking for a dramatic explosion. I didn't want to give my parents the satisfaction of calling me emotional or unstable. I wanted something they couldn't dismiss or twist a truth they'd have to live with. I started with something simple, updating my will. It sounded dramatic, but it was practical. My business had grown. I had assets, now contracts, digital property, financial accounts. I added my grandmother as my emergency contact and sole beneficiary, not my parents, not Jason. The woman who protected my future in a box no one else bothered to open. Then I created an anonymous scholarship fund for students who'd had their educational opportunities derailed by family interference. I set up a trust, wrote a mission statement, and made sure nowhere was my family's name attached. When the press release went out, it contained one line that made my chest feel like it was on fire. Inspired by a personal story of sabotage and perseverance. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession the world didn't know to ask for. But someone did ask. A journalist reached out, an independent writer who focused on human stories. She'd seen the scholarship announcement and wanted to interview me. I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop, and I told her my story, not the full version, not the names, not the family details, but the truth. The truth of losing something I didn't know was mine and rebuilding everything from scratch. When the article went live, the headline read, "Sabotaged by Family." This developer turned betrayed dreams into a mission for others. My inbox exploded messages from students, parents, teachers, strangers who felt invisible or controlled or written off. People thanked me for telling the story they were too afraid to speak. 3 days later, my father emailed me. "Take that story down. You're humiliating us." I didn't reply. Then my mother called. I let it ring. She texted, "Do you have any idea how this makes Jason look?" I laughed. For once, it wasn't about Jason. They removed me from the family group chat. My mother posted something passive-aggressive on Facebook about children who air dirty laundry for attention. None of it mattered. Because one morning I opened my inbox and found an email from Columbia University. "We'd be honored to invite you to speak at our alumni series. You didn't attend, but your voice belongs here." I cried. For the first time in my life, I cried because I was finally seen. And this was only the beginning of the justice they never expected. The email from Columbia sat open on my laptop for a long time before I could bring myself to respond. My chest felt tight, not with pain exactly, but with something deeper, heavier, like a pressure that had been building for years, and finally found a place to land. I read their message twice, then a third time, each word cutting through the fog of everything my parents had taken from me. "We know you didn't attend, but your voice belongs here." For so long that campus had lived in the space between a dream and a ghost story. Something I wanted, but never had the right to hope for something I thought I lost because I wasn't good enough. But now, suddenly, I was being asked to stand in the place I should have stood at 18, the place I had been denied. I accepted the invitation. The speaking event was scheduled for early spring. It gave me time to prepare to breathe, to build a talk that wasn't fueled by bitterness, but by the truth of who I'd become. The truth I was finally ready to own without shrinking. My boyfriend, Evan, was the first person I told. We'd been together quietly for months, nothing dramatic. No big announcements, just two people building something steady and real. Evan knew the entire story from the birthday dinner to the Columbia revelation. He never pushed, never questioned why I held certain things back. He simply listened when I needed to talk and sat with me in silence when I didn't have words. When I told him about the invitation, he pulled me into a tight hug. "You earned this," he whispered. "They can't take that from you anymore." For a moment, I let myself lean into him, letting the comfort sink in. Then I did what I always do. I got to work. I spent weeks crafting my speech. I didn't mention Jason, my parents, the sabotage, or the hidden letter, but the story was there, woven into every metaphor about opportunities stolen. Voices overlooked systems that fail people who don't fit the mold someone else has chosen for them. It wasn't an exposé, it was a reclamation. The night before the event, my grandmother called. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You're living the life they tried to stop. You take that stage with your head high, Judy." I promised I would. What I didn't expect was what happened the morning of the event. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts, missed calls, notifications flooding in. At first I thought it was about the article or the scholarship again, but when I checked my messages, the breath left my lungs. My mother, my father, Jason. All three had left voicemails. The first one from my mother was stern, frantic, and clipped. "Judy, we heard you're speaking at Columbia today. Why weren't we told? This is embarrassing. Call us back immediately." Then my father, "We should have been invited. This reflects poorly on the whole family." And finally, Jason, "Judy, I'm not sure what Mom and Dad told you, but don't let them pressure you. This is your moment. They just don't know how to handle not being in control." I stared at my phone for a long moment before placing it face down on the table. Evan glanced at me, but didn't ask. He knew. He simply reached over and rested his hand on mine. "You get to decide what today means," he said quietly. He was right. I didn't call any of them back. The Columbia Auditorium was larger than I expected. Rows of seats stretched out in clean lines, filled with students, professors, alumni, and curious attendees. The air hummed with quiet anticipation. I stood backstage, holding my note cards, breathing slowly. Evan stood beside me, offering a reassuring smile before slipping into the audience. When the coordinator called my name, I walked toward the stage lights with calm, deliberate steps. As I stepped onto the podium, the room fell silent. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a background character. I wasn't the forgotten sibling or the overlooked daughter. I wasn't the girl whose parents had clipped her future behind her back. I was the speaker. I began. The words flowed not dramatic, not angry, but honest. I talked about invisible barriers, about lost chances, about how young people are often shaped by forces they don't see. I spoke about resilience rebuilding and finding a voice after years of being silenced. I told them the truth without exposing the people who tried to bury it. And as I talked, I saw faces soften, heads nod. A few people even wiped their eyes. When I finished, the room stood. A standing ovation. Applause filled the space where doubt used to live inside me. And then I saw them, my parents, standing in the aisle, watching me. My mother looked stunned eyes, wide, lips tight, almost trembling. My father looked confused, like he didn't understand how any of this had happened without their permission. Jason stood behind them, hands in his pockets, his expression complicated. Not angry, not jealous, just proud. For the first time in my life, they were the ones in the shadows watching me take a place they had once stolen. After the talk, I stepped off the stage and into the hallway, where my parents approached me immediately. "Judy," my mother began, "why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ask us to come?" I met her eyes calmly. "Because this wasn't your moment. It was mine." She flinched. My father opened his mouth, ready to protest, but Jason stepped forward before he could. "Mom, Dad," he said quietly, "let her speak." Oh, surprising, powerful, and for once he was on my side. My parents looked between the three of us at the daughter they never believed in, the son who finally stepped out of the role they forced him into, and the silence that stretched between us like a mirror they didn't want to look into. "You're being dramatic," my mother whispered. "We always wanted the best for you." "No," I said gently. "You wanted control. That's not the same thing." My father's jaw tightened. "You're going to believe everything you think you know." I didn't raise my voice. "I have the documents, the emails, the acceptance letter you hid. I know exactly what you did." Their faces drained of color. Jason stared at them in disbelief. "You really did that?" he asked. "You sabotaged her college admission." My mother looked away. My father swallowed hard, but didn't speak. Their silence was louder than any confession. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because despite everything, I still made it. And nothing you did, nothing you hid, can take that from me now." My mother's eyes glistened with tears. My father's shoulders slumped. But I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I felt free. I stepped back, letting them stand with their shame, their confusion, their shattered version of who I was supposed to be. Jason walked with me toward the exit, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." "I know," I said, "and that's enough." Outside, the air was crisp, cool, clean. Evan waited at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets, smiling when he saw me. When I reached him, he wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "You did it." I looked back at the university building, at the doors I finally walked through on my own terms. My life hadn't followed the path it should have, but maybe it followed the path it needed to. "I didn't come here because of my family," I said softly. "I came here in spite of them." And with that, I stepped forward into a future that finally, unquestionably belonged to me.